Radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination? That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide, a show to help you better look through and see through the smokescreen and the propaganda and the spin that comprises so much of the news and narrative beamed at us 24/7 by corporate media. It's not that it's a grand conspiracy. It's more a matter of consensus and the fact that there are folks out there who feel like you and I can't be trusted to be presented with facts and then make up our own minds about, what it all means and what's the best way forward. No, we have to be steered like little children who just aren't quite capable of understanding what we're supposed to think and what we're supposed to feel. And of course, this is all done under the idea that it's just benevolent. We're just trying to help you. We just want to do our part to serve the community. I'm sure that is somewhere in the mission statement of every media organization found within the state of Idaho. And yet, behind all of it, there is, shall we say, a less than altruistic motivation. The mask, in other words, keeps slipping. You're going to see some examples of that in today's episode of Nowhere to Hide. Let's dive right in. Thanks to the wonderful reporting of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, in particular Anna K. Miller, a Boise school district has been discovered pressuring teachers to affirm new sexual identities of genderqueer, pansexual, and non-binary in students. Now, I know this is some people think, well, why should that be a controversial thing? Well, I'll tell you, because there are a lot of parents who really don't want to see that being taught to their kids in school. If you're going to teach your kids about it, teach about it at home, not in the school district. But Anna reports the Boise school district has been training teachers in radical gender ideology, including pressuring teachers to affirm students' different sexual identities, such as pansexual, transgender, genderqueer, and non-binary. Teachers were told to use pronouns corresponding to a student's gender identity, regardless of their deeply held personal or religious beliefs. They were given resources from radical groups advocating for genital mutilation surgery on children. These trainings were conducted by a Boise State University professor and a representative of the anti-racist group Advancement via Individual Determination, or AVID. Now, here's the problem. We're told this doesn't really exist, except it turns out it does. The Idaho Freedom Foundation Center for American Education has obtained many public records from the Boise School District, which has given teachers training that translate the basic tenets of queer theory into K-12 pedagogy. Between March of 2022 and April of 2023, gender ideology trainings were given to more than 70 teachers on at least 2 occasions in the Boise School District. Now, the first training was given to teachers at Capitol High School March 9th, 2022. The presentation, titled LGBTQ Plus Identities and Resources, was presented to teachers by Micah Heatherton, Lucy Groves, and Boise State professor Lisa McLean. The training included instruction on transgenderism, gender identity, and pronoun use, among other things. During the training, teachers were shown the Gender Unicorn. That's a cartoon graphic geared toward confusing children about their gender and sexual attraction. The purple-looking unicorn, which resembles Barney the dinosaur, has 5 different areas of its body that beg definition, including gender identity, sexual orientation, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, and emotional attraction. So let's take a look. This will give you an idea of some of the visual aids. Remember, this is aimed at children. And I'm not going to go through everything here, but there are the 5 areas: gender identity, gender expression. They're telling you who they're physically attracted to, who they're emotionally attracted to. Tell me why this is so essential for children. How does this square with learning, or at least, what most of us grew up with, understanding education to encompass? I'll wait for the answer, but I don't think it's there. Sexual orientation, they teach, is the type of person someone is sexually and or romantically attracted to. Gender identity, they say, is a person's concept of who they are, which can be reflected in how they present themselves. And they warn us, of course, that gender identity is not sexual orientation. We don't want to have, one layer of confusion without adding another layer on top of it. When it comes to pronouns, we're told pronouns are a tricky topic that not everyone is ready to disclose. Yeah, maybe they're not even thinking of it because it's no big deal to them. It's not even on their radar screen. So why don't we put it there and see if we can confuse them? One-on-one meetings with the students is a better setting to establish the pronouns they use. And when in doubt, use neutral they, them pronouns. Again, this is being presented to the educators. Why is it being presented? What's this great groundswell? Did we miss something for all these generations before us that this wasn't being taught? Then you have non-binary, gender non-conforming identities, and in general they say people who identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming don't identify with female and male, or identify with both. Some people who identify as non-binary don't identify as transgender. Similar to queer, non-binary is an umbrella term that can refer to a lot of different gender identities. I know it makes you want to take a Tylenol. It's confusing, and I think it's meant to be confusing. It's like, well, and if you ever get your head around this one, we're just going to make up more definitions, more categories on the spot. And I think the idea is pretty clearly to keep people off balance, and especially to, meddling parents who might ask a few too many questions. They're kept off balance as well because we don't want them asking the kind of questions that might prevent this from being presented to their children. Nevertheless, let's get back to the article here again from Anna Miller with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. So Anna, in her article, talks about trainers told educators to use as resources radical left-wing groups advocating for genital mutilation surgery on children. In other words, they call it gender-affirming care, but this is really about lopping off, permanently altering these kids' body parts. Things like the Trevor Project, GLSEN, and Gender Spectrum. BSU professor Lisa McLean gave teachers the handout Resources to Support Students, Educators, and Families about Transgender and LGBTQ Issues, which encouraged educators to impose more transgender ideology in schools and the classroom. For example, the handout included the GLSEN resource, LGBTQ students and school sports participation, which advocates for biological men to compete against women in school sports and for students to be able to use the bathrooms, locker rooms, and other private facilities based on their gender identity rather than their biological gender. Now, keep in mind, these policies are against Idaho law, so why are public schools pressuring teachers to violate state laws? If it was the other way around, if it was, someone pushing religious instruction, there would be a great outcry. But in this case, there isn't. BSD and BSU can't seem to get their story straight. On March 15th, 2022, BSU stated on its website that the training was for approximately 70 educators at Capitol High School in Boise on March 9th, 2022. But another post from March 16th shows the same announcement, but without the number of teachers who were given the training. And the Boise School District later claimed the district hosted a voluntary off-contract hour presentation that was reported to have been attended by approximately 10 staff members. Well, which is it? Rather than 70 educators, no documentation was provided to prove this claim. Okay, this is what holding their feet to the fire looks like. The Boise School District appears to give teachers and staff training in gender ideology on a regular basis. According to public records, the group AVID has also been training Boise School District educators in diversity and sexual identities. Now, AVID is a so-called anti-racist organization that's been impacting Idaho schools for 20 years, and by its own account, is present in at least 10 districts, 36 secondary schools, and 11 elementary schools, and has trained thousands of educators, administrators, and counselors. So when people say, well, there's no record of that happening anywhere, well, here are the numbers. Seems like it is to be found in a lot of places. Check this out, too. AVID held an induction seminar on March 9th, 2023 from 4:15 to 6:30 at the DTech Training Center on diversity and supporting LGBTQIA plus students, blah, blah, blah. Teachers and staff were, according to public records, only permitted to leave after the LGBT portion of the training was finished. The training appears to have been part of a course for teachers, counselors, and nurses who were new to the profession. Got to get them, squared away on the ideology and the indoctrination quickly. Boise School District paid AVID at least $16,200 for their services, according to the public records. Now, the first half of the training focused on diversity and included a disruptive equity framework. Next, the training focused on gender sensitivity. Trainers stated that some people might have deeply held personal beliefs about the issue. Regardless of such personal or religious beliefs, trainers lectured teachers about the gender unicorn and the necessity of using pronouns corresponding to a student's gender identity. Teachers were given a resource on LGBT terminology, which claimed any intolerance of the LGBT community is homophobia and transphobia. Interesting they would use those words, by the way. A phobia is an irrational, almost pathological fear. You don't have to have an irrational or pathological fear of this kind of curriculum to say this is inappropriate or this is offensive to my sense of right and wrong. To see how they want to turn it into a mental illness to so much as disagree. Christians and other teachers with sincere and deeply held religious beliefs about marriage, creation, or sex certainly would not have felt comfortable or included among such anti-Judeo-Christian rhetoric, which is probably the point. The training also included the Boise School District's gender support plan, which allows students to change their name and pronouns and use bathrooms and locker rooms based on their gender identity rather than their biological sex. Teachers are expected to affirm a student's chosen gender identity, pronouns, and name adopted in the gender support plan regardless of their personal beliefs. The BSD's gender support plans can be used for children as young as kindergarten. Well, how about that? The policy is based on a model created by Gender Spectrum, a group which thinks that 4-year-olds know their gender identity. Do they really, or do they require a little bit of prompting? Now, this year, Idaho legislators demonstrated they are aware of the danger that radical gender ideology in the medical industry poses to children. Public officials must also be willing to fight against this ideology in the K-12 education system, writes Anna Miller. Public schools have chosen to use state resources to push gender radicalism on children. Students will pay the price as public schools consume themselves with gender ideology, aided and abetted by universities and interest groups. Schools know that parents would object to pushing queer theory on kids, so they conceal their efforts from the public. Now, parents are beginning to see what's happening. They need lawmakers to restore their fundamental right to direct the education and care of their children. Amen. And this is a word for parents. You know, if you're worried, well, people are going to think I'm some kind of extremist. I've heard that word used, regarding people who point out these kinds of indoctrination. Okay, well, if you stay silent, and you fail to rock the boat in this war between good and evil, yeah, your life might be easier, but your children's won't. And again, this is the point is, why are they aiming at the kids? It's because kids are so much easier to train into ideas, good as well as bad ideas, than it is to train adults out of bad ideas that they've carried with them since childhood. Believe me, the political left knows this. And parents, if you're not doing your part, which means being very deeply involved in what your kids are learning at school, then you're missing the boat. And your kids are very likely being exposed to things which are meant to undermine any belief or any faith that they have in traditional foundations and traditional institutions, including the family. Now, for some people, that might be acceptable because they want to send that woke, virtue signal. Oh, look at me, I'm just, doing what I can to be a good parent and a friend to my child. But to be a good parent, sometimes you got to be willing to put your foot down. Sometimes that means you've got to be willing to say no. Sometimes you have to be willing to take the slings and arrows of people who are determined to indoctrinate your kid by telling them, no, it's not allowed. It makes me wonder, at what point would parents feel strongly enough about this, they would actually remove their children from such a system? See, this is one of the reasons I believe school choice is a timely topic, because there are parents who, may agree with a lot of what the public school system has to offer, but they don't agree with this, and for good reason. Now, shifting gears, just to illustrate how the education establishment is very, very hardcore left in its approach to, just about everything. You've probably heard about North Idaho College, which at one point was, I guess, a really comfortable hangout for some pretty hardcore leftists. Well, more conservative minds have been brought on board, and the drama has not ceased. It's, they're ruining everything. They're destroying our opportunity to, be activists without any kind of accountability. Check out this headline from the Lewiston Morning Tribune. North Idaho College hires attorney with extremist ties who scored lowest on College Board assessment. They really don't like that this guy was hired, but against their protests and against their warnings, they hired him. The board of North Idaho College on Wednesday night hired an attorney with far-right ties who scored the lowest in the college's review of 4 candidates. Colton Boyles of Boyles Law, based in Sandpoint, has no experience representing an educational institution. The decision has many on edge since North Idaho College's accreditation remains under sanction for numerous issues of board governance. Now, I love the implication here that, well, he has no experience in this and there's no possible way he could learn it on the job. Look, somebody had to learn it on the job, including some of your faithful left-wing lawyers, I'm sure. So let's not pretend that only those who have been carefully vetted for their ideological purity, are worthy to represent these school districts. Nevertheless, the article goes on to say, it's an editorial actually, the board voted 3-2 to hire Boyles as general legal counsel. Based in Spokane, Stevens Clay, that's who he was competing against, specializes in K-12 school law. Oh, good. A law firm that caters to the bureaucracy. Its attorneys have represented Eastern Washington University, the community colleges of Spokane, and Big Bend Community College. In the category of relevant legal experience, Boyles scored 46%, while Stevens Clay scored 100. Well, look, these guys have been representing other institutions, okay? It's safe to say they are an institutionalized law firm. Maybe it's a good thing that Boyles scored 46%. He's not charging more than the other firm. Look, they both charge $275 an hour, but maybe he brings a little less ideological baggage, and maybe that's actually what people within the school district wanted. But for the leftists around North Idaho College, oh boy. Nope, they're really upset about this. Now, any allegation that we're not qualified is without basis in fact or law, Boyles wrote in his application letter, touting his firm's experience in real estate law, employment contracts, insurance, civil litigation, and other areas. So maybe it's good he's a multifaceted attorney. Trustee Todd Banducci said Stevens Clay is not so experienced when counting years in the Idaho State Bar. So there. I believe the attorneys that they had presented to represent only came aboard in 2021 and 2022, whereas Boyles has been a member of the Idaho State Bar since at least 2017. Nevertheless, at the root of this angst expressed in this article is the idea that someone who isn't a dedicated left-winger may have some authority within the system, or at least some sway within the system. Oh, look, Krista Hazel, an activist behind the group Save North Idaho College. By the way, she's the same one who likes to pretend she's a Republican, even though she's a pretty hardcore leftist herself. And did I really learn that her father was one of the federal agents involved in the Ruby Ridge affair from about 30-some years ago? Interesting if true, because that acorn didn't fall too far from the tree, apparently. And she's been advocating to keep the college from losing accreditation, so she says. And she said the board's majority decision might have demonstrated poor governance by ignoring policy and recommendations of staff. You didn't do what we wanted. That's Krista's ballywick, definitely. She's right up in there. So who is Colton Boyles? Well, Boyles, whose full name is Dennis Colton Boyles, spoken in anger by his mother when he did something wrong, was recently retained by the Community Library Network, a group of Kootenai County libraries outside of Coeur d'Alene whose board members have ambitions of restricting books and services. What kinds of books and services? Well, they don't tell us, do they? That's probably because they have ambitions of placing proper boundaries around what kinds of books and services will be made available to minors. In other words, yeah, books teaching your kids all about the joys of oral sex, maybe that's not such a good thing. I think most normal people would agree that perhaps that's something that should be held until they're a little bit older and able to bear that kind of a burden. We don't want, grade schoolers and junior high schoolers having to wade through that. Well, those of us who aren't, hardcore leftists. And speaking of hardcore leftists, I know that a lot of people are all at Twitter today about the president's mugshot. Look what the left-wing psychos in North Idaho are doing here. The Idaho Tribune published this on Twitter. They're taking this divisive moment in our nation's history to fantasize about arresting local Republican leaders, Brent Regan, Scott Herndon, and Dorothy Moon by posting fake mugshots online. You got to, on the one hand, yeah, ha, ha, ha. On the other hand, the mask is slipping. This is not just, some lighthearted fun and because the president had his mugshot taken. This is, I think, pretty representative of how these individuals would act, given the ferocity with which they fight to protect their turf and to make sure that nobody interferes with their access to power. They're precisely the kind of people that need to be kept out of power, they being the left-wing psychos who think that, this is a smart thing to be posting publicly. Interestingly enough, here's I believe this is the snapshot of the president's mugshot. Yeah, I don't know if this is the official one, but this is the first one I could come up with. Okay, I'm kidding. This is not the official one, but I think it does justice. And the funny thing about it, look, I'm not a Trump fanboy, but the whole idea of him getting mugshotted and, we're going to put it out there, this will show his supporters, he's powerless and so forth. If you've seen the actual mugshot, I've never seen a more defiant, retributive look on a person's face. I'm sure more adult diapers were sold in response to that mugshot, presumably to the leftists who think, now we've got him. Honey, bring your boyfriend in here. They got him. They finally got him. Yeah, it's I don't think it's going to work out the way they planned. As evidence of this, I just have to offer this quick headline from The Atlantic. This was a story that popped up today. He wants you to look at him. Trump's mugshot was supposed to be an exercise in humility. Excuse me, do you know who Trump? We're talking about Trump, Donald J. Trump. Humility? I don't think so. He turned it into a threat. Oh, he's scowling. If he had superpowers, I'm sure there'd be laser beams shooting out of his eyes. And Megan Garber is very, very scared and disturbed about this, which I think is hilarious. I've never seen, and look, again, I'm not a Trump fanboy. I'm not somebody who's saying, yeah, therefore he should be the nominee. I'm just going to say, I've never seen anybody successfully capture the energy of their opponents and turn it around, so successfully capture it and ride it to take a victory lap. I know we're supposed to, well, isn't a mugshot supposed to be like the most humiliating thing ever? If you consent for it to be. He obviously didn't consent. And this is summed up very nicely, actually, by a poster on Twitter who just simply points out they're angry because the whole point of booking Trump was to humiliate him, which he says, I'm surprised The Atlantic openly admits it was to humiliate Trump, to demoralize his supporters, but it's done the exact opposite. I mean, I really didn't believe Trump could win in 2016. And given all of the election irregularities and the questions that I don't believe have still been resolved about the 2020 election, I don't know that I would say with any confidence, oh, yeah, he could definitely pull it off in 2024. But I will say stuff like this makes a repeat of 2016 seem a lot more likely. Because as I recall, there was kind of a similar vibe in the room. There's no possible way this monster could ever be elected. And the left assured us, that it would never happen. And then it did. Now, again, this is not a stump speech for Trump. I think there's way too much focus on politics as it is. But I think it's a great illustration of how the mask is slipping. The people on the political left are very, very determined. They want to hold on to their power. And sadly, they have a number of allies on ostensibly on the political right. These are the ones we call rhinos. These are the ones who are Republicans in name only. Yes, they talk the good talk when they're campaigning. I'm a fiscal conservative and I support the Second Amendment and I support getting government off our backs. But when they go to Capitol Hill, when they go and they legislate just like their left-wing counterparts. They defend things like smutty material in school libraries. They defend things like mutilating kids and gender reassignment surgery. By the way, you didn't hear a lot of talk about either one of those things. I think the Idaho Statesman said, well, isn't it interesting DeSantis has talked so much about the woke agenda, but he said nothing about it in the debate. No, well, neither did anybody else, which if you really want to learn something by watching the political debates, pay close attention to the things that they don't talk about. Nobody, you know what else they didn't talk about? They didn't talk about mask or vaccine mandates. They didn't talk about the incredibly destructive lockdowns which destroyed people's lives and destroyed businesses and set school children back years in their learning. Why do you suppose that is? Again, there are some topics that, oh, it's okay, we can talk about that. That's pretty safe. But for some reason, that wasn't one of them. Kind of makes you wonder why. I guess it just underlines the importance of you've got to think for yourself. You've got to be willing to question everything that is presented to you, whether it's from a corporate media source or whether it's just little old me on this show. The harder you think about these things, the more you're willing to do your own homework and dig in, the more likely you are going to be better informed, and the less likely you're going to be misled, or at least led by a little ideological ring through your nose to a conclusion of someone else's choosing. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination. That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.